How many examples do you know of a more intelligent thing being controlled by a less intelligent thing? Would you use a Chinese model if you're unsure about the safety implications of it, but it's cheaper?
When more bots are creating than humans and more bots are engaging than humans, then what's the point in being on the internet when you haven't got a clue if you're interacting with a human or not?
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Project Flux podcast, the first one of the year. We had a New Year's Eve one recently, but this is the first proper show of 2025, and it's really, really great to be back. And with us today, we have friends of Project Flux podcast, Dave Officer. Welcome, Dave, and thank you for coming back.
You're very welcome. Very, very welcome. A friend of the show.
Friend of the show, absolutely. Number one friend of the show, I think.
Oh, that's nice. That fills my cockles. That's not the right saying, is it?
Probably not, but we'll go with that. I think that's fine.
Yes.
How was your Christmas, mate?
It was lovely. You know, it was glorious. I had so much stuff that I wanted to like intersperse it with like chilling out and like doing a lot of planning. And I did a lot more of the chilling out than I did planning, but it was lovely. So like, it's like what I said to you earlier on today is I completely switched off. I don't think I've ever gone a full 2-week period and looked at my phone less than I did. You know, I stayed away from everything. I barely looked at emails, barely looked at the news, barely looked at any social media. Like, it was bliss. So I'm but as a result of that, I'm very out of touch with
Well, it's good. We can gauge your reaction on some of these stories, because to be honest, I think it's been relatively quiet since the OpenAI 12 days of shipments just before Christmas. It has been, relatively quiet. In this world, it's never totally quiet, and I have kept my ear to the ground slightly. But there's still a few interesting stories. I think we'll start with the first one. Yoshi, you wanted to write about this one, which was the US versus China, which sounds very kind of, but everything else. But we're not talking about wars here. We're talking about who's leading on AI, right?
Project Flux is here.
Just want to say thank you to our sponsors, Construct AI. They've been a massive, massive support of what we've been doing in 2024, and they're also going to be sponsoring us in 2025. So a big, big shout out to Construct AI. We're really, really proud to be sponsored by them.
Project Flux is here.
Right?
Yeah, well, we did the predictions for 2025, and I thought it'd be interesting to see, who on the global stage will steer or lead AI for humanity effectively, because AI will exist in most industries going forward. I mean, now it powers efficiencies that contributes to 3.5% of global GDP by 2030. It's estimated that businesses worldwide are to spend 307 billion in AI just this year, which is meant to also then double by 2028. So that's 632 or something billion, which is 29% CAGR, right? Which is a significant figure. So the stage is set for AI, and it's the question of who will lead the charge. And like you mentioned, James, the US and China are the leading contenders. And what actually sparked my interest in this story was when China released the DeepSeek version 3 model, and everyone was raving about it. It was a small AI model which was delivering and competing against the likes of Claude 3.5 Sonnet and GPT-4o. So I think it was good to just look at that competition, really.
So what is, just for the listeners and for Dave, who hasn't been listening to much of the news recently, what is the DeepSeek model? How does it differ from, say, ChatGPT? Is it a similar sort of thing?
It's a similar sort of thing, but effectively, so there's been a lag in the development of LLMs within China in comparison to the US. Okay, so they're kind of slow adopters into this technology. And it wasn't a revolutionary, like just turn on like ChatGPT was. It was slower rather than it being more sudden. But when this model came out, I think the power of it was that it's also open source.
So like the Llama model, like the Facebook model.
Yeah, so last year we saw the market, led by 3.5 Sonnet, Google's Gemini, OpenAI's O series, and those were leading the market. Now you've got Alibaba's Qwen and DeepSeek version 3, which is stepping into the market and are delivering that power in a much smaller package. Now, the key thing to know so I looked at 3 different things here initially. I looked at, if we're trying to understand which country is going to lead AI going forward, I looked at, pure intelligence, I looked at financial investment, and I also looked at safety alignment. So I think those 3 things will give an indication of who's going to lead. Now, the O1 and the O3 models are, the greatest. They are the zenith. They're the peak of intelligence at the moment, but they are expensive. So they don't justify consumer-based pricing, even though they've reached furthest into the world of AGI. So in this comparison that I looked like, I actually removed the O1 and the O3 model aside and just compared Quen and DeepSeek 3 with, those typical models that people are using like GPT-4o. Now, any guesses on how it played out?
It's probably, if you take the OpenAI stuff out of the equation, I bet you it's pretty close or above some of the others. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, because I've heard little murmurings about this DeepSeek thing, and that it does perform a hell of a lot better than some of the other bad boys, even though they've created it at like a fraction of the cost, right?
Yeah, exactly that. So we looked at it against English reasoning, verbal reasoning, coding, maths, and then Chinese. Now, on English, they used the MMM. I didn't, but the people who did the research used the MMLU benchmark, which is a popular benchmark. And actually, DeepSeek was second to Llama, Meta's Llama, and it was very close, very close. In coding, DeepSeek was better than the second place, which was Claude 3.5 Sonnet.
Mm-hmm.
In maths, DeepSeek beat Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And then in Chinese, Quen was the most effective, with GPT-4o coming in second of the Western counterparts.
Oh, that's interesting. So DeepSeek didn't do that well in Chinese?
No, Quen was better, but I think
it was
second. Yeah, but GPT-4o was the Western counterpart. Now, so it goes back to that saying, which is today's AI will be the worst you'll ever use, right? Because going forward, they'll always be better. So this is why I took into consideration financial investment, right? Now, looking at the financial investment, the US currently dominates AI spending. 67.2 billion in private investment in 2023 compared to China's 7.8 billion.
Okay, that's a huge difference, isn't it?
It's a huge difference, but now China have got this initiative, which is Made in China 2025, and they're aiming for their market spend to be similar to that of the US by 2025. So they are catching up effectively. So I then looked at this and thought, okay, we can look at, the money that's going into this, but I also saw a thing about electricity usage. So I looked at electricity usage between the US and China and how much of that can be attributed to data centers. So data centers account for 4.4% of electricity in 2024, with the rise to 12% in 2028 in the US. Mm-hmm. And China, it was half of that in 2020. So it goes to show that the US are, leading the way in terms of investment in both data centers and electricity usage, but also the financial commitment from private investment.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the money behind it, and then they've got the big players in the Western world behind it. But I think there's something else here which is worth considering. China's been kind of burnt before in the whole microchip war, where they were left behind, and they're still playing catch up now. And I think this whole Made in China 25 is them making sure they don't repeat historical mistakes. And it's very easy for us in the Western world to assume that, OpenAI and Claude, which is funded by Amazon, for instance, are the only players in town, but that's just not true. And China are going to do their very, very best to make sure they don't make the same mistakes they made with the microchip wars.
Yeah, and it does seem as though China are, because a lot of their development or commitment is state focused by the government, whereas the US is more heavy on private investment. I think the blockages across public sector will be less frictional than it is within the US. So they might be able to move quicker.
But the actual AI models, I mean, we know that China have very, very stringent controls over what comes out on the internet. Are there similar sort of controls with these AI models? People can't just use them. I mean, we've pretty much got free reign. It says that it won't do certain unethical things if you ask it to make a bomber, for instance, which, make sure that source code doesn't get used for bad. But is that level of safety extra in the Chinese model because they're worried about what the public could consume?
So safety is the third pillar, but when comparing the two of them, the US still came out on top for me, purely because even though China have developed, they also signed the Bletchley Declaration, which was 28 other countries, which is hosted on the UK government site. But they also released a document on technical safety developments. So it shows you how to build these more advanced AI models. However, it is more focused domestically. So there are concerns on an international scale that they were silent on the weaponization of AI in these different technologies, where the US were a lot more clear on that. So that silence was taken as concern, as a cause for concern on the international.
Why was that a cause for concern?
Because they haven't committed on how they'll navigate or if they won't use this for that sort of technology, if they won't weaponize AI. So I think that's a concern. But they have tightened domestic controls is the main thing. Now, with the US, they did convene the International Network of AI Safety Institute, which is, in support with the UK, and it's got Anthropic and OpenAI in. They pulled $11 million for research. They included in the AI safety summits. They released the guiding principles for developing advanced AI systems for organizations. But there is also concerns, right? Because recently there was a whistleblower at OpenAI, 26-year-old developer, and there was a story that he committed suicide. But now there's a private investigation going on saying, he wasn't suicide. There's a murder investigation that the parents are trying to raise, and it was echoed by Elon Musk on X.
He's busy on X these days, isn't he? It's a good job he owns the platform.
So on the forefront, it looks as though the US are clearer and leaning on the side of safety. So, for instance, OpenAI added deliberative safety alignment in the O3 model. Anthropic have the responsible scaling plan and the AI safety levels. That is in play, and you can look into documentation and get visibility into it. But you can never see what's happening under the hood.
Yeah. So, there's a question for you, Dave. Would you use a Chinese model if you're unsure about the safety implications of it, but it's cheaper?
See, my instinct...
It's a test of character here.
Yeah. So my instinct is no. But when I started using TikTok, every report I was reading about it, and everybody that I would normally trust was saying that, the way that they've structured their terms and conditions, they are literally farming all of your data to just use it against us, blah, 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 blah. And I'm still to this day using TikTok to promote my business and stuff. So it didn't deter me. I suppose you just got to look at, like, the reason I use TikTok is incredibly selfish. I use it to market my business.
Because it's got an amazing algorithm that does what you want it to do, right?
Exactly. So although it does have a lot of safety concerns within it, when you approach it from a very selfish perspective, which is exactly what people will do when it comes to using AI anyway. Although the better part of your conscience will be fully aware that you probably shouldn't be doing something. But if you know that it will personally, in the short term, benefit you quite substantially, then you're probably more likely to forgo those concerns and then jump straight into it. Because we're all, as much as people don't like to admit it, we're all quite morally loose when it comes to our own self-interests, and I'm definitely guilty of that. So although I would like to be able to sit here in front of you two and stand on a little pedestal and say, no, absolutely not.
Never use it.
If it was going to benefit me, I probably would dive straight into it. Yeah.
And I think that's the reality for most people. And this is exactly, I think your TikTok analogy is perfect because it's going to be very similar. And I think this is a bigger story than we even think it is, because over the next year, as these models get more and more advanced, and the cost goes up, because we saw how much was O3, Yoshi? It was like 150
$300,000, wasn't it?
$300 a month or something stupid.
No, it was $300,000 to compute one task, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the O1 was O1 Pro is like 100 or something, isn't it?
But the cost to the consumer was I can't remember if it was $150 or $300 a month for the O3 Pro. Very, very expensive. So when it comes to that, Dave, and there's a Chinese competitor who's at, say, half the price, people are going to use it, notwithstanding. So I think we're going to have to monitor this situation. And I don't think it's the last we're going to hear of these Chinese models making a huge impact. But let's move on to the next story, if that's all right. So kind of on a similar theme, it was about OpenAI's privacy promise. Do you remember, I'm not sure if either of you remember, probably some point last year, OpenAI said, don't worry about your data. We're going to have this tool that comes out that's going to enable you to opt out of your data being trained, right? So I can't remember what it was called. It was called Media Manager. And everyone was like, God, that sounds good. Yeah, that's okay. They're thinking about our safety, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the news coming out from one of the agencies, TechCrunch, is saying that, well, first of all, where is it? It's not here. It's 2025. It's still not here. And even worse, that it's really not a priority at all for OpenAI, considering all the other stuff they've got going on. And it's made me just wonder, was it all just a bit of a gimmick in the first place? Did they just say it to get people off their back and make them assume they were doing something about it? And if they have, there's now a bit of a backlash. because people are starting to notice and start saying, well, where is it? So I don't know, who wants to go on this one? What's your view on this? Do you think this is a little bit of trying to sort of get round the security issue by OpenAI, or do you think they genuinely have forgotten or they're behind schedule on the development of this tool?
I think part of the thing that works in their benefit is the fact that news around this subject moves so fast.
Yeah.
That when something becomes a hot topic, it will have dissipated in 2 or 3 days with something else. So I think there was a massive, there was a light shone on this towards the beginning of this year. Adobe got a lot of heat for it because they were training their models on
in 24 or 2024, yeah?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Beginning of 2024, yeah. Because they announced this in May 2024, didn't they?
Something like that, yeah.
Something
In
around
middle
that sort of
of the
time. There
year.
was a lot of heat on big tech companies around this. And I think, and they thought, well, we have to, as a PR exercise, if nothing else, we have to talk about what we're going to do to stay on top of this. I don't think they had any intention of doing it. It was
That's my gut feel too.
Do you know what? Interestingly enough, today on the radio, and I haven't heard this before, I was in the car earlier on, and on the radio there was an advertisement for lawyers. You know, like have you slipped and fallen at work?
Yeah.
This is the exact replica of that, but it was AI. It said, it named LinkedIn, it named Xbox and something else. It named a few things, and it said, if you're a user on any of these platforms, chances are your data has been stolen to train an AI model.
Oh,
contact us.
That is interesting.
And you could be entitled to compensation.
You've got to give me the details of that because we need to investigate that.
Well, funny enough, yeah,
that's massive.
I was in the car and it popped up, and I was so sort of interested and amazed that it came up that I didn't hear the name of the lawyers that came up. But if I've heard it today, you're going to start hearing it all over the place.
Yeah.
They've obviously been teeing this up to start kicking it off. So it's going to come up again as a big issue. And I think it's something they will probably have to address at some point, even though they had no intention of really doing it initially with this first data management thing that they were talking about.
Yeah, well, what they've said is well, we've implemented filters and we've got these policies, but that doesn't really cut it really, because, and they also says, oh yeah, you can webmasters could tell that you can't send bots over our site, all those kind of things. So you can kind of opt out if you want to, but it's really, really difficult to do, and you've got to be quite technically minded to do it. So that doesn't cut it for me at all. What do you reckon, Yoshi?
Yeah, I mean that's a pure example of a dark mode, a dark choice within user experiences. I think it's worth noticing the difference between a user clicking the button to say don't use my data, and then people putting information out there publicly, and then the LLMs then being trained on it, because these LLMs are trained on the entirety of the internet, so it was going to happen. I think they overlooked a lot of the legislation around scraping data and using people's property effectively.
But there are some test cases, right? I was doing some research into it. There was a Google test case probably about a decade ago that basically said that Google copying millions of books for Google Books was permissible. So they're going to use all these little tricks and all these little precedents to say, well, what we're doing is nothing that hasn't already been done. Yeah,
and also because Sora, I think it was, generated a video which had the TikTok logo in or something which resembled that very similarly. Now, for companies and for professionals, this is a concern, because then AI can then regenerate your authentic content, and it will do it with a lot less soul or substance. Okay, but to the layperson, it might look similar. The problem where I see this escalating is if you have your own personal data on there to the point where you can have your own digital twin online, that is you. So you effectively have a problem with your identity, because there could be an AI version of you sprawled across the internet. It's just got to be collated and trained.
Well, there was another story this week, actually, it didn't make it one of the top ones, with a Meta on Instagram had to take down these AIs that were going around just creating accounts and speaking as if they were another person, because it was coming up with some, obviously hadn't been trained properly and hadn't been fully tested, and they said it was an alpha. But that's exactly where they're going with this. They want to create personas on the internet to create more accounts, because then that helps them. At the end of the day, it comes down to revenue, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we were kind of, because I lean more towards the innovation side a lot, and I was saying that I wasn't agreeing with what the EU were doing when they were putting a lot of these blockers in place to make sure when the models are deployed within Europe and in the UK, they have to follow certain protocols, safety protocols. And now you look back and you think, well, that was the right thing to do. But then what will happen is these new stories come up about intellectual property and data confidentiality, or stealing data, etc., etc. But then when they release a new, more powerful model which takes you a step closer to AGI, everyone forgets about it.
Yeah, everyone gets excited, don't they? So and that's why we do this, really, is to make sure people are aware of what's going on, because these tools are getting easier and easier to use, and there's more and more of them out there, and just knowing about what's actually happening is really, really important. Because I'm just going to jump around a bit actually now, because there was another story from Geoffrey Hinton, who said, and this is his quote: "How many examples do you know of a more intelligent thing being controlled by a less intelligent thing?" There are very few examples. This is him back on the AGI track. But also, at the same time as he's done that, he's also doubling down on Musk's attempt to block OpenAI from becoming a for-profit company. So there's a heck of a lot of stuff going on, and it's very, very difficult to understand who's on the right side of the line here.
I like that saying a lot. When I read that, I thought that was an awesome saying from Geoffrey Hinton. It doesn't surprise me.
He's a clever guy, isn't he? It's true. It is true. So it's all we can do is make sure we're aware of what's happening, where AI is being used, because I feel, I'd like your perspective on this actually, Dave, from what, because you're not as immersed in it as we are all the time. Do you see the line starting to get blurred a little bit now between what is AI and what isn't AI, or what's aided stuff with AI? That's my fear, is that it's just going to get so blurred, you're never going to get a good idea of what really is being used, where AI is being used to generate content.
Yeah. It all goes back to that dead internet theory, doesn't it? That I think we talked about before the last time I was here. The fact that exactly what Meta are doing, the fact that they are quite open about the fact that they're going to unleash a load of bots and they want them to become users to increase engagement on the platform, and it's just going to become this circle jerk of stuff that means absolutely nothing to anybody. And when more bots are creating than humans, and more bots are engaging than humans, then what's the point in being on the internet when you haven't got a clue if you're interacting with a human or not? Because when it becomes so good, and it's hard to differentiate, it's going to be interesting.
Unless all the bots are better and more intelligent than the humans.
Which they...
But do you guys then think it would actually be a unique selling point for organizations to promote that they don't have AI?
I think that's coming. I've said that a while ago. I can see this fight back, a bit like the I think of Rage Against the Machine. That's showing my age with bands, but when they came and they had a record that said record was made with no electronic instruments at all. Do you remember that, Dave? Their first album.
Yeah.
I can see that tagline coming back, saying this is a company that has no AI involved. We're not there yet. That would be like suicide at the moment because it's the buzzword. But I reckon give it another 6 months to a year, and you'll see these companies coming up using that as a selling point.
But interestingly as well, what I've noticed is there's been a lot of research recently looking at platforms like TikTok and other AI-based solutions, ChatGPT. And there's research looking into how we are now consuming information differently. Now, take that into the context of what Dave just said. You might have social media platforms which have bots in it. If you don't know who's a bot, you might misinterpret, this rules of engagement that we've developed over a millennia with humans. And you might start to think in a delusional way in terms of communicating with people, because you're communicating with bots in a different way you communicate with humans. Because there's substance behind when you speak to a human. It'd be interesting to see if there's a distinction between those who start to use AI a lot more frequently and how they communicate, and those who don't actually use AI. There could be a demarcation there, but we should.
Well, I think this is a really good segue, and there is a story about a new sustainable building material, which we'll maybe come back to in a minute. But it's such a good segue to your micro company story, because the way that people are going to start using AI is, and we've seen this, the predictions from the McKinseys of the world saying that, the day of having a job for life is gone, and the days of the sort of corporate machine are gone, and we're going to become more and more kind of small companies. Now there's this prediction that there's going to be micro companies, which are basically maybe one or two people, and then the rest of the workforce is effectively AIs. So going to your point about how we're going to use this, do you just want to talk a little bit more about what a micro company is, Yoshi, and some of the research you've done on it?
Yes, it was an extreme example, but effectively, can you have an organization which is run by one or two people, where then all the other functions of that organization is it's full of agents. It's agentic systems or workflows. And that's a very extreme example. Now, there are some companies who are already operating in this space because it's a hot topic. It's one of our predictions in 2025, who have developed kind of vertical agents who focus on very specific use cases, they can connect to certain softwares, third-party tools. However, doing more and more research into agentic systems and how they are deployed, I think it's easier said than done. I think there is less precision in terms of the outputs you can get from a AI or an agentic function. Whereas with the humans, you can kind of get an indication of what someone's going to perform like, their behavior, the output, the outcomes. There's more propensity to hallucinate. You don't know which models are going to be more effective. Cognitive architectures can become very sophisticated and costly, especially when you start to run state machines. So I think with these agentic systems, I don't think it's possible to run entire organizations yet.
Yeah.
Even if you have human in the loop, even if you have sophisticated systems, I think the rules of engagement are difficult. I think it's hard to provide feedback. Chain of thought is still quite nascent. It's new in terms of getting more milk and sweating these assets more, some of these models. But I think it will slowly come, and I think we'll start to get hybrid-based organizations. But the one in the newsletter, I talked about a very extreme example of that. But it's just a showcase that this is a glimpse into the future where you might have a single founder that one day might orchestrate an entire digital workforce.
But there was like stories of, was it Klarna in the UK already starting going down that route? And I don't think it's not a either or situation. You can have that hybrid role. And for someone like you, Dave, I mean, how attractive is it for you to, rather than having, because you run a small company, rather than having to go and hire loads of people and all the issues that come with that, to have some AI agent do those tasks for you?
It's incredibly appealing.
See?
Because jobs I've had in the past I've had teams before, and when I started working for myself, I knew I never wanted to recruit anybody. I knew this was always going to be me, which obviously comes with a certain amount of limitations to it. But I thought for my own sanity, it was a decision worth making. But now that there's one I've started the experiment with, which I think I've told you about, that Sintra.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll put the link in the show notes for people to have a play with it.
So, it's early days. I'm not amazed yet. I'm not that impressed. But at the minute, I'm still just trying to teach it how to talk like me and what to do. But at the minute, it just doesn't integrate with anywhere near as many things as it needs to for it to be an actual useful tool.
And the other thing as well to mention with those who are looking to actually build some of these agentic systems, there are softwares or platforms you can use to help build them. So LangGraph and LangChain. There is dispute as to whether you should actually be using some of these platforms, because what they do is add a level of abstraction to the code. So because of that level of abstraction, so basically you say you have the native models that are API accesses from OpenAI and these companies. You then add LangGraph and LangChain, who then add a level of abstraction, which is segmenting the code, sorting the code for you. Now, if you then build on top of that and something goes wrong, it's much harder for a software engineer or a coder to then look back and debug the system. So when you deploy it at a production and when you productionize these things, they're harder to actually fix and scale. So there's an argument that a lot of these platforms aren't production ready, and that the way that we're building these things, we're moving too quickly. We need to understand the essence of what an agentic system is. So I actually, having done this research, I think agents will be a 2025 prediction, but I think there needs to be more done to understand how to implement them and not overcomplicate it. So for instance, Anthropic and Google have just released 2 guides saying how to build agentic systems. And the number one thing is, don't build something which is too complex. It doesn't need to be. Just iterate and improve.
Yeah. And I think rather than jumping in and saying, right, I'm going to automate my entire workflow from start to finish, and if I don't do it all, then I failed, that's the wrong attitude. It's like, actually, if you think about even what we do now, even within Project Flux, we are definitely all helped by AI agents. We use AI with a lot of our tasks. Same with you, Dave. You were saying, even within Adobe, you're using some of the AI features. So we're partly along that journey. And then even though you got the LangGraph and the LangChain, there are also more low-code ways of doing it, even within Microsoft, right? Within Microsoft, you've got the agent builder and things like that. So I think it's going to be a year of experimentation, and we'll probably land on the 2-tier thing, which is if you want something very, very bespoke and personalized, you'll need to go down the kind of LangChain route. But for most people, they'll be able to create something using the Microsoft or the Google AI agent builder.
Yeah,
That's my prediction of where we end up.
yeah, and the main thing to mention, kind of using Dave here as an example, is it will really benefit entrepreneurs, people who want to build companies with not a lot of networks or not a lot of resource to build it, and only you kind of get it. It's perfect. So you'll see so many companies springing up now, which is good.
Well, it takes the risk away from starting a company, effectively, doesn't it? Because the biggest expense for a company is the hiring people. But if you can get up and running by the use of agents and bots, very, very little. It's a bit like when the internet came along. It took away the cost of having a website. It was obviously a lot cheaper than having to have a store somewhere.
Yeah.
And this is another example of that. It's bringing the cost base down, but it still needs that creativity of the person who's going to use that. Because if you put these tools in front of somebody who's just basically not that creative or not that clever, they're not going to know what to do with it. So I think it's incredibly exciting for anyone who's got the endeavor to try and create something from scratch, because you can. There's nothing stopping you now. You can basically create a company. You can create your own store and site. You can use all these tools to basically do anything you want to do. There's really no reason at all to have to go out and spend loads of money on a workforce.
But the only competition is if you let these things run autonomously and you have organizations which are just agents.
That's the level 5, isn't it, of the OpenAI roadmap that leaked about this time last year. Entire organizations being run. So, Dave, you could be taken over on your own business by an agent.
Your digital twin, James. Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, my own twin will kill me. You just made me think of a really interesting analogy as well. You've got this stuff at your fingertips, right? But if you don't have the creativity or the know-how to actually know how to implement them, then it's like finding a genie in a lamp. You ever hear those jokes about an Englishman, an Irishman, and a Scotsman find a genie in a lamp, and they all invariably fuck up their wishes because they it's the same sort of thing. It's like this AI is like a genie coming to you saying, "I will do whatever you want. Just type it in this little text bar," and you go, and you mess it up. So you do need.
You do. It reminds me of a story I had today. It's like sometimes we're talking about these really advanced things like level 5 AGI and everything, but I had a query today from somebody who was saying, I tried to use something in AI and I got this, it didn't work. It was an awful response. And then so I said I could give it to me. I did it, really simple prompt, and he goes, that's amazing, how did you do it? I'm like, well, I just asked it the question right. It's like, okay, with some people, and it's not dismissing it, we got to be aware that with some people, we are still at that level. How do you actually talk to these things to get a good response?
I find that weird because back in the day, when everyone was using Google, they were typing literally, how do I do within sentences? And then was like, no, you don't do that, just put the keywords in. So why are these people now then struggling with?
Yeah, because what you type into Google, it doesn't really work as well, because you've got to be more prescriptive with a prompt, with a large language model.
Back in the day, people were typing literally. So
yeah, we've gone too far the other way. Like I would never, Yoshi, if I wanted to have a conversation, if I wanted to ask you what the best Chinese restaurants are around here, I would never say to you, Chinese restaurants near me.
Unless you were desperate and you were struggling to talk.
Yeah, that's a good point. You've gone too far the other way.
We definitely have. Listen, guys, I think we're coming towards the end. The only other thing to bring up is obviously there's our New Year's podcast that came out last week. So we actually make our predictions. We tried to keep it down to 10, but we didn't manage, did we, Yoshi? So we ended up with 15. So do check out the podcast from last week as well. And there is another story which we won't have time to cover about the construction industry and the use of this new sustainable building material, which has been generated by the use of AI. But that will give you the chance to read that for yourself. All we can say now is thank you very much for joining us. Any last words from you, Dave? Thank you again for joining us. It's always good to have a friend of the show on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I hope to join you again at some point in the future.
Fantastic. Yoshi?
Nothing from me, mate, but I'd like it if you just echo back that Jeffrey Hinton quote again. I thought that was awesome.
Oh, yeah, this was the one more thing. So what did he say? He said quite a lot, but this is the quote I picked out. How many examples do you know of a more intelligent thing being controlled by a less intelligent thing? There are very few examples. So on that bombshell, I think we'll leave it there.
On that dystopian bombshell.
Good night, gentlemen. See you soon.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.